The reason I bring this up and the reason that it's important is because Dusk has said in the past, I'll leave all the sources down below, but he has said in the past that Leon was actually supposed to be the main character. And obviously there's a clear contradiction here. Not to mention 3 months ago, we actually caught Dusk in another contradiction. You know, my prediction is that there's going to be even more leakers that are going to pop out of, nowhere. There's going to be a bunch of randos because that's exactly what occurred with Resident Evil 4 Remake. A leaker who gets his leaks from other leakers who are sometimes not really good at leaking. They give him bad information. And also, how do you trust a leaker who obviously is so naive that he can't even actually realize that somebody is swindling him? You know what I mean? Obviously, I don't know if this guy's just making up stuff. Maybe this is just all from him and he's maybe talking to another person. I don't know. I don't know the details. The only thing I think that's very clear here is that Aesthetic Gamer, aka Dusk Golem, is one of the worst leakers for Resident Evil ever. All right, so in today's video, we're going to be looking at the new Resident Evil 9 director's kind of video where he kind of showcased a lot of new information regarding Resident Evil 9. We're going to look at it because he did confirm a couple of things, so we're going to be reacting to it live. So let's get started. All right, let's start. Hello, Platinum members. Thank you for your continued support. I am Akifumi Nakanishi. So this is by Google Translate, so there might be some, some errors. Like obviously that's not his name. His name is Koshi Nakanishi. From director of Resident Evil Requiem. I'm sure all of you Platinum members know this. The other day, we finally announced Resident Evil Requiem. This is the 9th title in the numbering series. A year ago, I released a video saying I'm making a new work. Finally, we were able to make the announcement. I wonder how everyone reacts to the trailer. This is Grace, the new main character. So this information right here is actually really interesting because we have the RE9 director essentially stating that Grace is the main character. The reason why this is important is because there have been a lot of leaker glazers, especially on my comment section. There's been a bunch on Twitter that have been kind of theorizing around all the information that came from Dusk, aka Dusk Golem, Aesthetic Gamer, and he's also known as that as well. The reason I bring this up and the reason that it's important is because Dusk has said in the past, I'll leave all the sources down below, but he has said in the past that Leon was actually supposed to be the main character. And obviously there's a clear contradiction here. Not to mention 3 months ago, we actually caught Dusk in another contradiction. He was actually complaining on Twitter, as he loves to do, but he was complaining that he has no idea where all of these leaks are coming from, that Jill is going to be the main protagonist, and how that basically doesn't make sense. Just to paraphrase, of course, you can check that full video out on my channel. But the funny thing is, kind of just long story short, one of his followers actually called them out and showed him a screenshot of his Discord back in 2021 where it was him that started this rumor. It was him that stated that Jill was actually going to be the main character of Resident Evil 9. So this guy obviously is not someone to look at all for information, especially when it comes to Resident Evil. I don't really know about his track record for other games, but the track record for leaks in Resident Evil, if you guys don't know, is complete garbage. Literally, if we go back 2 years prior to Resident Evil 4 Remake's release, we got a whole bunch of garbage leaks. Literally, like I would say 98%, and of course this is just an estimation, but 98% I would say of the leaks were completely illogical for one thing, but on top of that, they were completely just flat out wrong. We had a bunch of leaks up, like some of the leaks that I kind of remember is that like Krauser wasn't going to be in the game. There was no island. You were going to play as Luis, Torres Mendez was going to be a stalker enemy throughout the whole game. Just a bunch of nonsense like that. Oh, there was also the Hookman. That was actually one of the big leaks that a lot of people were buying into. And of course, I've been stating this since the start of my channel, back in 2021, that these leaks are complete trash. They are not true. And, that ended up being the case. I think the only leak that ended up being true was actually a leak that I covered, which was Wesker's kind of concept art. I thought it was the funniest looking leak, so I trashed it. And it ended up being one of the only ones that was actually true, which is hilarious, by the way. But I guess that's all to say that not trusting leaks is in your favor. It's in your favor to not trust leaks. As mentioned, literally 98% of all of the leaks that happened for RE4 Remake were complete garbage. So there's no, for when it comes to other games, right? Like there's other games out there where leaks do end up being true. Like I guess one game that I'm thinking at the top of my head is like Dead by Daylight. They have a better track record as opposed to Resident Evil. So this is why I've always stated you definitely cannot take leaks with a grain of salt. If you ever hear an article, a YouTuber, a TikToker saying take this information with a grain of salt, it's a clear indication that this person doesn't know what they're talking about, especially since, as mentioned, the track record is already horrendous when it comes to leaks. So, having Koshi Nakanishi here stating that Grace is the main character is a huge contradiction against Dusk Golem, who, as mentioned earlier, he has a track record of saying a lot of nonsense. And by the way, before the copium comments start stating stuff like, what if Leon does show up later in the game, but he's not playable? It doesn't matter, because at the end of the day, this doesn't negate what Dusk specifically said, which was that Leon was going to be the main protagonist in Resident Evil 9. And since we clearly know that this isn't the case, and by the way, we're also going to be going over more information from the Resident Evil 9 director that definitely confirms or at least alludes to Grace being the main protagonist. But of course, before we get to that, if you guys want to stay up to date with Resident Evil news, then make sure to leave a like and also consider subscribing. We're almost at 8,000 subscribers. I am planning on doing a Q&A. And yeah, for those of you that don't know, I've actually been covering fake leaks ever since I started my channel back in 2021. So this is not my first rodeo. You know what I mean? There's been so many fake leaks. And to all of the new fans that are really hyped for Resident Evil 9, as I am, I'm also super hyped for Resident Evil 9. Having leaks like this, at the end of the day, it honestly makes people turned off when the game actually releases, which is what ended up happening for RE4 Remake. So many people thought that the game was going to have like random stuff, as mentioned before. And this is why it's super important to not even entertain Resident Evil leaks, because as mentioned, Resident Evil leaks do not have a good track record. It's not like other games out there where, you get leaks. Sometimes it's wrong, but most of the time it's right. That is not the case with Resident Evil. It's mostly wrong. And so don't follow those other freaking creators, those TikTokers, those articles of people kind of just glazing this leaker, but not only him. My prediction is that there's going to be even more leakers that are going to pop out of, nowhere. So there's going to be a bunch of randos, because that's exactly what occurred with Resident Evil 4 Remake. But anyways, let's go back to the video. Koshi next says, and then there's the subjective horror. I think he's saying survival horror, but again, this is Google Translate. I basically posted all of the image there. Well, if you say so, in Resident Evil 7, it's like a new protagonist. It's unclear what will happen next. With such elements, I think there is another, RPD. On the one hand, it is the worldview story of the main. Wait, let's see that again. On the one hand, it is the worldview story of the main story in Resident Evil series. So he's saying RPD is a huge component to the story. This time we'll be having it will be heavily involved in that too, I think is what he was saying. Suffice it to say, the title of the game I was involved in, Resident Evil Revelations, is one of those. They're doing a good job of that as well. Wait, is he suggesting that they're doing another Revelations game? Or is he just trying to say, again, this is Google Translate, so the translation might be off. But obviously, if you guys know Japanese, let me know. I'll leave a link to the video and my sources in the description. But that's interesting. Is he saying, wait, let's go back. He says, suffice it to say, the title of that game I was involved in is one of those. Okay, so he's just mentioning Revelations. They're doing a good job of that as well. So I think he's referring back to RE9. I don't think they're working on a new Revelations. It could be. Obviously, we don't know, but I don't think that's what he's saying. I wonder what it would be. Resident Evil 7 compared to Resident Evil Revelations, I think this is the title that will make people the most happy this time. So it's interesting. Again, it's a bit weird here, because I don't know if he's saying Resident Evil Revelations is the game that he's more inspired with. If that's the case, I think Resident Evil Revelation actually nailed down survival horror really well. I think, especially during the time of 2012 when it first released for Nintendo 3DS, we had just had Resident Evil 5 in 2009. We had Dark Side Umbrella Chronicles 2009 as well. But in 2012, I think it was just a couple months later, we would get Resident Evil 6 in October October 2nd in North America. And of course, that game was way overplayed the action. So, there was a disbalance. And obviously Resident Evil 7, as you guys have probably heard me say, did play up more of a horror aspect of the game. So that's interesting that he's mentioning Resident Evil Revelations and Resident Evil 7. Those are the two games he has worked on. I did state that in my previous video. But what I think is going on here is that he's mentioning Resident Evil Revelations or maybe Resident Evil 7. I can't tell. I'm assuming he's Resident Evil Revelations. I think this is a title that will make people the most happy this time. There's still a lot of information that hasn't been revealed in the trailer. The release date is February 27, 2026. We will keep you updated, so please continue to support us. Yeah, so the reason we're actually looking this as well is that the Residents of Evil did kind of go out and state that that it was going to be first person perspective, and that obviously doesn't seem like it's the case with this translation. If anything, it seems like what I could ascertain, because again, this is not a perfect translation, is he's kind of comparing Resident Evil 7 and Resident Evil Revelations. Now, I don't know which one he's kind of alluding to here and what he thinks. My guess is that it would make more sense, and I think I would enjoy it more if Resident Evil 9 was closer to Revelations than Resident Evil 7, since I'm not the biggest fan of Resident Evil 7, as many of you guys know. But yeah, Grace, the new main character, and there's a subjective horror. Yeah, I think there he's saying survival horror. Resident Evil 7, it's like a new protagonist when it's unclear what will happen next. And right here, this is actually another point that kind of makes more sense here, because I'm sure in the comments we're going to get leak glazers that are going to say, well, just because Grace is the main character doesn't mean there can't have another main character. I mean, I think right here, what he's getting at here is that he's saying it's like a new protagonist and it's unclear what will happen next. Since he is the Resident Evil 7 director, and obviously that was kind of his logic as to why we got the character Ethan Winters. He was just a blank slate of a character. We had no previous experience with him. And the fact that he says with a new character, it's unclear what will happen, right? Like you could kill off the main character, which is what ended up happening in Resident Evil 8, which I did theorize on the channel, which was true. So what I'm getting at here is that he's kind of alluding that this is the approach this is why he decided to bring in a new character. So does that mean, we might not be able to see Leon, Chris, Claire, Jill in the new Resident Evil 9? No, I mean, we could end up seeing them like that. That is a possibility. We might be able to see them. But what's clear here is that we're not going to get another new, like Grace is definitely going to be the main character here. I will say I don't glaze Dusk or other leakers. My full decision on him, trust in him, is still undecided. Even though the dude got stuff wrong, he did get stuff right too. Yeah. I gotta say though, I will be upset if Grace is the number one main character. I'm tired of new characters. I want passing of the torch if need be, not just new people thrown in. Doesn't feel connected. That's a good point. As mentioned, it could be that we might end up getting maybe like a section, kind of like Chris, for example, kind of like what Chris played in RE8 Village. If you guys remember, there was kind of like a lot of Resident Evil fans like to refer to that section as like the Call of Duty section. We were kind of just running past with Chris with night vision goggles, going through the whole village and destroying a whole bunch of stuff. Very action packed, which again is kind of going more on the RE6 side. But that could definitely be the case. That could definitely happen. But the one thing that I want to stress here is that Dusk has had stuff incredibly wrong before. He did state in 2021, as we stated, that Joe was going to be the main protagonist. That's obviously not the case, and he actually contradicted himself because he was like, who's bringing that up? Where is these leaks coming from? They're completely wrong. Well, they're coming from him. So obviously, if you have a guy with that kind of track record where he doesn't even remember the stuff that he's mentioned, he doesn't even know. Another thing that I almost forgot to mention that's very important is that I'm sure people will come up with the counter argument. Well, Dusk, predicted and leaked that Resident Evil 9 was going to be showcased at this Summer Games Fest. No, he literally said the same thing last year. He also predicted that it was going to be releasing in the Summer Games Fest last year. And that didn't go well. I can actually read his tweet right here. In May 3rd, 2024, he says, I have good news / rumors to deliver on Resident Evil 9. The possible delay I had murmurs about can be pushed aside. Resident Evil 9 should be revealed pretty soon and released next year. If what I heard previously holds true, should be in January. It'll have about 7 years in development. That was May 3rd, 2024. It's a no-brainer that this obviously didn't happen. And, this guy has stated in the past as well that he loves to take educated speculation. So what the frick does that mean? It just means that he's essentially guessing with the little information that he thinks he knows, when in reality, I don't even know how this guy decides that something is a leak and what's an educated speculation. He always just confidently says things as if it's going to happen. And if it doesn't, well, whatever. I guess I'm not that great of a leaker, which he has actually stated. If we look here in February 12th of this year, he said, so keep in mind right now, I don't know Capcom's marketing plans, and I usually only get better pulse on if something's releasing soon in the weeks leading up to things happening. Oh, okay. So that means that your sources only work when something's about to release. So what about last year? How come that didn't work? So again, that seems like last year in 2024, you were doing an educated speculation. And sure enough, that's what he says. So this is educated speculation, but still speculation on my side. I think that's one of the only times he actually specified that he was doing an educated speculation. On top of that, on May 12th, 2024, he said something very interesting. In one of his big long tweets, he says, I identified some good ones, but there is in many ways I am still naive. And in some situations, I have to work with a lot of mixed messaging from sometimes multiple different voices going a lot of different ways. So it seems like he has a lot of fake. It's funny how this leaker has other leakers. And so you kind of have to ask yourself, well, who's right? You know what I mean? Even he doesn't know. He says he's pretty freaking naive and just takes whatever information that he likes. And so, yeah, but what's interesting here is that he says Capcom will be glad to know that a lot of their leakiest sources dried up. Yep, that's something that he specifically stated. And as stated in this video, that's due to the 2020 Capcom data breach where hackers breached Capcom's and they basically extracted a bunch of files that were supposed to be private, which is one of the reasons why we actually knew that Capcom was working on Resident Evil 4 Remake, and as well as 3 other games, Resident Evil Outrage, Resident Evil Hunk, and Resident Evil, Outrage Apocalypse, which a lot of people assume to be Resident Evil 9, which could be very well be, the case. But those are the only things that were actually true. So it's funny how since 2020, this guy has already admitted in 2024 that his sources are non-existent. So how can you trust a leaker who gets his leaks from other leakers who are sometimes not really good at leaking? They give him bad information. And also, how do you trust a leaker who obviously is so naive that he can't even actually realize that somebody is swindling him? You know what I mean? Obviously, I don't know if this guy's just making up stuff. Maybe this is just all from him and he's maybe talking to another person. I don't know. I don't know the details. The only thing I think that's very clear here is that Aesthetic Gamer, aka Dusk Golem, is one of the worst leakers for Resident Evil ever. And the other thing that I should mention as well is that I don't hate Aesthetic Gamer, aka Dusk Golem, and neither should you. I don't recommend you guys send hate to this guy at all. This guy's already received so much hate because he's just been, swindling a lot of fans in the community for so many years. This guy has already stated several times that he's done with Twitter, he's done with leaking, he's not leaking anymore. And then a couple months later, we see him returning. Why? Because he loves clout. He loves that people are paying attention to him. So I'm not saying to go hate on him. Definitely don't do that. If anything, I'm telling you, don't give this guy attention, and definitely share this video with people that that are definitely taking this guy seriously, when obviously there's so much evidence that you should not be taking this guy seriously at all. And the other thing that I also have to mention too, that a lot of leak glazers love to do, they love to bring this counter argument. They love to say that leaks, a leaker might not be wrong. What if in 2021, when he said that Jill was the main protagonist, what if during development, Jill was the main protagonist, but then later it got changed? Because that was kind of his counter argument to being called out. He was basically saying, you'll probably see it in the concept art because that's what was happening. This is a huge counter argument that a lot of leak glazers love to do, but this counter argument completely falls apart when you think about it. In reality, if in development a game is always changing throughout the years, and let's say a leaker gets information in 2021, and then the game, the next year completely changes in 2022, that would actually be an argument that helps my position, and that position being that you shouldn't be trusting leaks at all. If during the game development, things are always changing, Let's say that that's the case, because I don't know, I don't work in game development, and the information that a leaker gets a long time ago is completely off, but he says that it was correct during that time, even though there's no way to verify that unless you actually spoke and sat down with the developer. If anything, that kind of argument makes it so that in reality, you shouldn't be trusting any leaks. Because let's say Dusk Golem got a leak and it was true. Let's just say, for the sake of the argument, that he was right back in 2021 that the Capcom was going to make Jill the main character. If you do believe that, if you honestly believe that he is a trustworthy leaker and just the information changed, that would just, if anything, that would just make it so that in reality, you shouldn't be trusting any leaks if the potential for change is always going to happen. So that's a counter argument that in reality, I don't understand. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't make logical sense. As mentioned, that counter argument just honestly it helps me. It helps my argument, and at the end of the day, and that in reality, you shouldn't be trusting any leaks, because if the potential for change is always happening throughout the years, then what the frick is the point of listening to an old leak that's going to be changed tomorrow? You know what I mean? Like, you should not be taking any of the leaks with a grain of salt. And as we explained earlier, Resident Evil has a horrible track record with leaks. And this isn't something that's just happened recently. This has actually been an ongoing problem since, I believe, 2012. If you look at the Resident Evil wiki, there's actually a section there that kind of talks about all of the fake leaks that have been kind of happening, that I think they started tracking them since Resident Evil 6. So I don't know why Resident Evil is just so littered with that. But when it comes to Dusk Golem, as one of my chatters just mentioned, he has had stuff in the past be true, but even he's gone on the record on Twitter and basically stated that since the 2020 Capcom data breach, his information has been a lot of his leaks, a lot of his sources have dried up because Capcom has been very secretive with what they're working. So yeah, again, this is just another kind of another reason why you should not be trusting leakers whatsoever, especially if you're going to use that counter argument that games are always in development and they're always changing. Jerpaul says, is this first person or third person? I hope third. Yeah, so there's nothing right now that confirms whether it's actually going to be in third person. But there's nothing but there's also nothing that states that it's going to be first person or third person exclusively. So we don't know. My guess is that since Shadow of Rose could have easily have been a game that was in first person, because obviously the only reason Capcom made Ethan a first person, right? The only reason they made Resident Evil 7 and Resident Evil 8 first person is because of Ethan. One of the main producer for Resident Evil 7 actually wanted the player to feel like the character, which, as I've stated, is another reason why I don't really like Resident Evil 7, because it almost wanted to play with that RPG mechanic. But in reality, as you guys could tell, the only RPG kind of mechanic is probably at the end. But even that decision gets negated immediately, because it is canon that to the story that Mia is the one that gets, saved. And then obviously, so it doesn't matter if you pick Zoe, that's just like a what if. It turns into a what if. It's not like the story ends up happening. And I guess you could also make the counter argument that RE1 kind of tried to do that with multiple endings, right? If you saved Rebecca or if you saved Barry, but you can't save both, even though canonically, both of them are still alive. So, but going back to what I was saying, it definitely seems to be the case that Capcom is going to make Resident Evil 9 in third person. Now, does that mean we're not going to get first person? No, I think there is a possibility that we might end up getting first person. I think we're definitely going to get a VR2 version, which, is basically first person. But yeah, I think, you know what I mean? Like, if Capcom, I think I would have believed that we would have gotten first person if Shadow of Rose was in first person, but it wasn't. You know what I mean? Like, the game, if anything, Shadow of Rose made Capcom go back and make RE8 into a third person, which I think was one of the best decisions for RE8, even though, of course, the game was made in first person. That's why even if you play in third person mode, the cutscenes shift back to first person, right? So no, I think it seems to me like, with all the evidence from the previous games, right, with the previous DLC with Shadow of Rose, I think it's fair to say that that's Resident Evil 9 is definitely going to be third person. Jamie Nas says, what if Kevin comes back on RE9? Yes, I saw a lot of my viewers kind of state this, and I don't know where this theory comes from, but they were kind of theorizing, or they weren't theorizing. It seems like they were regurgitating information from another leaker, or sorry, not another leaker. It seems like a lot of my viewers were kind of regurgitating information from another content creator who theorized this. I don't know who that content creator is, but the theory kind of goes that the three voices that can be heard during the trailer is actually from Kevin, and I think two other of the Outbreak characters. I don't specifically remember the full theory, but I got a lot of those comments. So I don't know who said that. I think that would be kind of trippy if it was the same voice actors, because Capcom does have a habit of kind of replacing old voice actors, but they do have a habit, again, of kind of reusing a lot of the actors, the new actors that they kind of work with, right? I mean, like, even if we look at Resident Evil 8, one of the chicks, the rando chicks, Elena, that kind of just, stays in the burning building, she's voiced by, the same voice actor as Jill, right? So same thing, right? I mean, Carlos, voice actor for Carlos, Jeff Sheen, he's also voiced Chris in Resident Evil 8. So, but I didn't hear, this is something, and you can watch in my breakdown if you haven't watched it, but I didn't hear anybody that sounded familiar. Honestly, I didn't. I think there was one commenter, one viewer of mine, and I don't know if I can find the comments, so I guess we'll see with the edited version. But there's one viewer that suggested that the director, that for the FBI director in that whole scene in the trailer where he talks with Grace, that is actually the same voice actor as Marvin from RE2 Remake. And I think that would make a lot of sense. I would have to listen to that again. Again, this is not my theory. I don't know whose theory it is. Maybe my commenter got that from somebody else. I don't know, because I have seen that, by the way. I have seen that there's a lot of my viewers have been kind of regurgitating a lot of stuff. Like, one of my viewers told me that Residents of Evil kind of theorized that Lisa Trevor was the creature that was hanging from the wall, and I got a lot of people that were saying the same exact thing in my chat, and I had no idea where they were getting this, but I knew they were just regurgitating information, but they were making it seem as if they came up with it, which is incredibly ignorant, by the way. Don't do that. If you get any kind of theory from someone, always source them. Always say, oh yeah, well, I heard Jimmy said this. Jimmy said that this is the theory. Don't ever say that this is a theory that comes from me. That just shows that you're incredibly ignorant. So I guess that's kind of a side tangent, but just so you guys know, yeah, I don't respect that at all when people do that. Yeah, you really have to source your stuff. That's why I always source my stuff in my videos. By the way, click this video if you guys want to see Dusk getting called out by one of his followers. Anyways, thank you so much for watching.